The Galactic Union was a place of endless voices, colors, and species. Inside its grand hall, hundreds of beings gathered. Some were tall and thin like walking trees. Some were wide and scaled like living shields. Others floated on soft energy fields, glowing as they spoke in musical tones. This hall was where the galaxy decided on great matters. It was where peace treaties were signed, trade agreements were argued, and disputes between ancient empires were settled. But on this day, the gathering was not about war or trade. It was about something so unusual that even the most serious council members could not stop whispering. The Krylith had made a decision. The Krylith were not just another alien race. They were the undisputed apex predators of the galaxy. Their claws could tear through the strongest armor. Their teeth could crush stone. Their senses were sharper than any other species. For centuries, other races had lived in awe and fear of them. To meet a Krylith in combat meant certain defeat. To stand against them was to face extinction. And yet, the mighty Krylith had asked for something no one expected. They wanted a human babysitter. The announcement spread across the hall like a wave of disbelief. Voices rose, echoes bounced against the high crystal walls, and translators buzzed as species tried to understand if they had heard correctly. A human, hissed a member of the Soren, a species known for their long necks and sharp eyes. Of all creatures, they are fragile. They are short-lived. They are unfit, another alien added, its many legs tapping the floor in irritation. Laughter rippled from several corners of the hall. To them, humans were strange but not impressive. Yes, humans were bold. Yes, they were curious and quick to adapt. But they were not strong like the armored Jelgar. They were not brilliant engineers like the Shirin. They were not powerful in mind like the telepathic Ulthari. Humans were young, still climbing their way into the galaxy. Yet the Krylith had spoken with firm voices. We choose a human. At the center of the hall stood a human representative, uncertain and nervous. His name was Daniel, though to many aliens the sound of his name was odd and difficult. He stood straight, though inside he felt small under the countless eyes fixed on him. He was an average human, not a soldier, not a leader, not a great thinker. He had been assigned to the Galactic Union as a cultural observer, a role that meant listening more than speaking. Now he found himself at the center of the galaxy's greatest surprise. One of the Krylith stepped forward. The hall grew silent. Even the bravest ambassadors leaned back in their seats. The Krylith's form was towering, armored in natural plates that shimmered like black metal. Its eyes glowed faintly gold, its claws clicked against the floor, and its voice carried deep vibrating tones that resonated in every chest. "This is no mistake," the Krylith declared. "We have observed. We have studied. We have decided. Our young will not be raised by our kind alone. They will be guided by one of humanity. We choose Daniel." The silence that followed was so complete that Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. "Why?" demanded an Ulthari elder, its voice like wind through stone. "Why not one of your own? Why not a warrior of proven strength?" The Krylith's head turned slowly, and when it spoke, its words carried weight. "Strength is not enough. Our young have strength. They need something else. They need guidance. They need balance. And humans..." The Predator paused, looking down at Daniel. "Humans have what we do not." The statement sent confusion through the hall. What could humans possibly have that the galaxy's apex predators lacked? "Are you saying," a scaled Jelgar roared, "that fragile creatures are to raise hunters?" "This is madness." Murmurs rose again. Many agreed. It sounded like madness. The Krylith were feared even as adults. To place their young in the hands of a human seemed not only dangerous but insulting to the great predators themselves. Yet the Krylith remained calm. "Madness is to repeat the same path and expect change. We do not fear. We trust." Daniel swallowed hard. His mouth was dry. He had not agreed to this. He had not prepared for this. He had only come here to observe meetings, to learn alien culture, to write reports. And now somehow the deadliest beings in the galaxy had chosen him to care for their children. He raised a hand timidly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice thin against the hall's vastness. I think there's been some mistake. I'm not trained for this. I've never even taken care of alien kids before, or human ones for that matter." A low, rumbling sound filled the chamber. It took Daniel a moment to realize the Krylith was laughing. The sound made several species shift uncomfortably, unused to hearing such a terrifying noise used for amusement. "You are chosen," the Krylith said firmly, "not for what you have done, but for what you are." The hall erupted into chaos. Some shouted that it was foolish. Others whispered that it might be some strange Krylith test. Some even feared it was a trap, a way to humiliate humans or to prove their weakness. But within the storm of voices, Daniel stood frozen. His mind spun with questions. Why him? Why humans? What could he possibly give to creatures born to hunt, to dominate, to conquer? The Krylith's golden eyes locked on him again. "Do you accept?" The question rang out, simple but heavy. Daniel felt every eye on him. Every species in the galaxy seemed to lean forward, waiting for his answer. His first thought was to refuse, to say no, to step back and let someone else take the impossible task. But then another thought came. If he refused, humanity would be mocked forever. They would say humans had been offered a place in history and had turned it down out of fear. They would say humans were not ready to stand among the stars. Daniel's heart pounded. His hands trembled. But when he opened his mouth, his words were steady. "I accept." A wave of shock ran through the hall. Some gasped, some muttered, and some stared in silence. The Krylith, however, lowered its massive head in acknowledgement. Then it begins. And with that, the fate of one human, and perhaps the view of humanity itself, shifted forever. Daniel's decision had been made in front of the entire Galactic Union, but the true weight of it only sank in days later. He sat inside a transport vessel built by the Krylith, heading toward their nursery world. The walls around him were dark metal, curved and heavy like the ribs of a giant beast. The hum of engines filled the silence. 2 Krylith guards sat near him, watching quietly, their eyes glowing faint gold in the dim light. Daniel kept his hands on his knees, trying not to fidget. He told himself to stay calm, but the truth was, he had never been more nervous in his life. He was about to become a babysitter, not for human children, not even for harmless alien young, but for hatchlings of the deadliest predators in the galaxy. His mind spun with questions. What if they don't like me? What if they bite me? What if I can't control them? And worst of all, what if the entire galaxy laughs when I fail? The ship shook gently as it entered the nursery world's atmosphere. Through the window, Daniel saw a landscape of black stone and glowing rivers of molten fire. The air shimmered with heat. Towering nests of crystal rose from the ground like spires, each one surrounded by protective barriers. This was no gentle garden world. This was a place built for predators to grow strong. The transport landed and the ramp hissed open. Heat rolled in, heavy and choking, but Daniel forced himself to step out. The guards led him to a wide chamber where the hatchlings waited. The chamber was dim, lit by burning minerals that glowed red in the walls. The floor was soft with layers of dark sand, and the air smelled faintly of iron. At the center, 6 small shapes moved. They were the Krylith hatchlings. Daniel froze. They were not small by human standards. Each one was already the size of a large dog. Their bodies covered in sharp scales, their claws long and gleaming. Their eyes glowed faintly like their parents'. When they saw him, they hissed and snapped their jaws. One hatchling lunged forward, testing him. Daniel instinctively stepped back. The guards growled low, but Daniel raised a hand. "It's okay. Let me try." He crouched down, lowering himself to their level. His heart pounded, but he remembered something he had once read about animals on Earth. Predators respected confidence. Slowly, he looked directly into the glowing eyes of the closest hatchling. "Hey there," he said softly. "I'm Daniel." The hatchling tilted its head, confused by his calm tone. Another one circled him, testing his scent. Daniel didn't flinch, though his skin prickled with fear. Minutes passed like hours, but slowly the hatchlings relaxed. They hissed less. One even tapped his boot with a claw, curious rather than hostile. The guards exchanged surprised looks. Most species would have been attacked immediately. But this human... He was still standing. That first day was long. Daniel learned quickly that Krylith hatchlings were nothing like human children. They did not cry for attention. They fought for it. Every interaction was a test of dominance. When one wanted a toy, it snarled at the others until they backed away. When another grew hungry, it snapped its teeth impatiently. Daniel didn't have claws or fangs, but he had something else. Patience. When 2 hatchlings fought over a piece of carved bone, he didn't shout. He stepped between them, firmly but calmly separating their claws with his hands. "No," he said, his voice steady. "You can share." The hatchlings blinked at him, confused. Share, that was not a word in their nature, but Daniel repeated it, showing them by breaking the bone into 2 pieces and giving one to each. Slowly the growls faded. Later, when one hatchling tried to climb the wall and nearly slipped, Daniel rushed forward and caught it. The small predator twisted in his arms, hissing, but Daniel only held it tighter. "Easy, easy. I've got you." The hatchling blinked up at him, breathing hard, then rested quietly in his grip. By the end of the day, Daniel was exhausted. His shirt was scratched, his hands were sore, and his voice was hoarse. But the hatchlings were calmer than the guards had expected. They rested in a circle, their glowing eyes half closed, while Daniel sat nearby watching them. The guards whispered among themselves. "Strange," one muttered. "They do not rest this easily. Perhaps it is a trick," the other said. But the hatchlings seemed to listen to him. Word spread quickly. Reports left the nursery world and traveled to the council halls. The galaxy's leaders heard the same unbelievable news. The human had survived his first day. More than that, he had begun to tame the untamable. On the second day, Daniel brought something new. From his bag, he pulled out small round balls made of light plastic. To humans, they were simple toys. To the hatchlings, they were completely alien. He rolled a ball across the sand. The hatchling's eyes followed it, glowing brighter. One pounced, claws digging into the ball, but when it bounced away, the hatchling chased it again. Soon all 6 were leaping, running, and snapping after the rolling toys. Daniel laughed, clapping his hands. "Good, that's play." "Not fighting, play." The guards watched in astonishment. Krylith hatchlings were known to sharpen their skills through battle, not through harmless games. Yet here they were, practicing speed, reflex, and coordination without drawing blood. Over the next week, Daniel introduced more ideas. He told them simple stories before rest time, his voice calm and steady. At first they growled impatiently, but soon they grew still, their glowing eyes fixed on him as he spoke of Earth's heroes, explorers and protectors. He taught them to take turns with food, placing dishes in front of each hatchling one by one. When one tried to steal from another, Daniel gently but firmly tapped its claw. "Wait your turn." Slowly, the hatchlings began to understand. It wasn't easy. There were moments when Daniel thought he would fail. Once a hatchling bit his arm hard enough to leave a bruise. Another time, 2 nearly toppled him in a sudden wrestling match. But he never gave up. He stayed calm, patient, and firm. And the hatchlings began to respect him. Not as prey, not as another predator, but as something different. Something they didn't have among their own kind. By the end of 2 weeks, the change was clear. The hatchlings no longer hissed at his approach. Instead, they rushed to him, eager for his games, his stories, and his strange lessons. When the Krylith elders came to observe, they were silent for a long time. They saw their young sitting in a circle, waiting patiently for food. They saw them listening to stories instead of snarling. They saw them chasing harmless toys instead of claws. Finally, one elder spoke. "This is unexpected," another replied. "Perhaps this is why we chose a human." Daniel didn't hear their whispers. He was too busy teaching one hatchling how to roll the ball back to him. When the little predator finally managed it, Daniel grinned. "Good job." The hatchling's glowing eyes blinked with pride. And somewhere in the galaxy, species who once laughed at the idea of a human babysitter began to wonder if they had underestimated humanity. Weeks had passed since Daniel first arrived on the nursery world. At first, he had been seen as a strange experiment, a fragile outsider trying to handle the most dangerous young in the galaxy. But slowly, very slowly, the impossible began to take shape. The Krylith hatchlings were changing. They were still fierce. Their claws still gleamed, their teeth were still sharp, and their eyes still glowed gold in the dark. But there was something new about them now, something no one had ever seen before. They did not snarl at each other every second. They did not fight until their scales bled. They still wrestled, but sometimes they stopped when Daniel said one word, "Enough," and they listened. The guards who had once doubted now watched silently, unsure of what they were witnessing. They had grown up in the old way, where strength ruled every moment and kindness was seen as weakness. Yet here was a group of hatchlings, the future predators of their kind, sitting quietly while a human told them stories. Daniel sat cross-legged in the middle of the chamber, The hatchlings formed a half-circle around him, their tails curled, their glowing eyes wide. He held a simple wooden carving he had made with a knife. It was shaped like a ship. "This is the story of the first humans who went to the stars," Daniel said. His voice was calm, steady, and filled with quiet excitement. "They were not strong like you. They had no claws, no armor. But they had courage. They worked together. They shared what they had. And because of that, they crossed the dark and reached new worlds." The hatchlings tilted their heads. The idea of sharing was still strange to them, but they liked the rhythm of Daniel's voice. One of them leaned closer, sniffing the wooden carving. "You see," Daniel continued, "strength alone can win battles, but cooperation wins survival. A lone hunter is powerful, but a pack is unstoppable." The words sank in deeper than Daniel realized. The hatchlings had been born to hunt alone, each proving itself stronger than the other, but now they were beginning to see themselves as a group, not rivals. Later that day, Daniel tested them. He set out a puzzle, a heavy stone slab that needed to be lifted to reach the food hidden beneath. Alone, each hatchling tried and failed. They scratched, pushed, and growled in frustration. "Together," Daniel said firmly. "Work together." At first they ignored him. Predators did not share victories. But when one hatchling pawed at the stone while another pushed, the slab shifted. Their eyes widened. They tried again, this time 3 working at once. The stone lifted and the food was theirs. The hatchlings let out sharp cries of triumph, not against each other, but together. The guards exchanged uneasy looks. "This is unnatural," one muttered. "Or it is evolution," the other whispered. From that day on, the hatchlings began to seek each other's help. They still fought, yes, but not to the death. They began to understand that strength did not only mean dominance, it could also mean unity. News of this spread quickly. Observers from other species visited, watching from behind protective glass. They expected chaos, but instead they saw discipline. They expected savagery, but instead they saw learning. And always at the center of it was Daniel, the human babysitter, guiding with patience. Some species scoffed. "This is only a phase," they said. "The hatchlings will grow out of it and return to their true nature." Others were not so sure. "If predators can learn balance," one council member whispered, "then perhaps humanity is more dangerous than we thought. Not because they fight, but because they teach." For Daniel, life was far from easy. Every day brought new challenges. One morning, he awoke to find 2 hatchlings growling over food again. They had forgotten his lessons, and anger burned in their eyes. Daniel did not panic. He stepped between them, arms wide, his voice loud but calm. "Stop," he shouted. The hatchlings froze, claws raised. Slowly, Daniel crouched down and looked at them both. "You have enough. You do not need to fight for every bite. You are stronger when you share." The hatchlings snarled in confusion, but when Daniel divided the food himself and handed it to each one, they grudgingly accepted. Later, he wondered if he was crazy. "What am I doing? Teaching alien predators about kindness?" But then he looked at them resting peacefully together, and he knew it was working. Daniel also introduced games humans played. He tied ropes into knots and challenged the hatchlings to untangle them. He set up races, encouraging them to run not just against each other, but in teams. He even showed them how to build small shelters with stones and sticks. At first, they clumsily knocked everything down, but with practice, they grew careful and clever. Each lesson carried a hidden message: cooperation, patience, balance. One evening, as the twin moons of the nursery world rose, Daniel sat outside the chamber, exhausted. The guard stood nearby, silent as always. "Why do you do this?" one finally asked, its deep voice echoing in the dark. Daniel blinked. "Do what?" "Treat them as if they are children. They are predators. They were born to fight." Daniel thought for a long moment before answering. "Because they are children. They may grow into predators, but right now they are young. They can still learn. And if they learn only violence, then violence is all they'll ever give. But if they learn something else," he shrugged, "maybe they'll surprise you." The guard did not respond, but its glowing eyes stayed fixed on him for a long time. Days became weeks, and the hatchlings grew stronger, taller, and sharper. Yet the change in their behavior was undeniable. They began to protect each other during games. They began to wait for Daniel's signal before attacking puzzles. They began to look at him not with suspicion but with respect. When alien observers returned, they gasped at the sight. Apex predator hatchlings were sitting quietly in a circle, waiting for their turn in a game. It was something no species in the galaxy had ever imagined. Reports spread across the stars. Some laughed. Some feared. Some simply stared in disbelief. The galaxy's predators were learning the human way. But the greatest shock came when one hatchling, the boldest of the group, was hurt during play. It limped, hissing in pain. Normally, the others would have ignored it, for the weak were left behind. But instead, the other hatchlings gathered around. One even nudged the injured sibling gently, while another brought over food. Daniel's chest swelled with quiet pride. "Good," he whispered. "That's good." The guards watched in silence, unable to deny the truth. The human had changed them. And somewhere in the council halls of the Galactic Union, debates grew louder. Was this dangerous? Was humanity teaching predators to become even more cunning? Or was it a gift, a new balance for the galaxy? Whatever the answer, one thing was clear. The Krylith hatchlings were no longer just predators. They were something more. And at the center of it all was one human guiding them with patience, courage, and a simple belief that even the fiercest could learn another way. The nursery world had grown strangely peaceful since Daniel's arrival. What was once a place of endless growls and fights had become a place of laughter, games, and strange new lessons. The hatchlings were still predators, sharp and fierce, but they now played together, worked together, and even rested together. But peace in the galaxy never lasted long. One afternoon, as Daniel was showing the hatchlings how to build a tower of stones, the alarms began to ring. The ground shook with sudden violence. The guards, who always stood silently nearby, snapped to attention, their eyes flashing gold as they barked commands. Daniel looked up, startled. "What's happening?" One of the guards turned to him, voice heavy. "Parasite swarm. They have broken through the outer defenses." Daniel's blood ran cold. He had heard whispers of these swarms before. They were not intelligent, but they were endless. Tiny insect-like creatures with razor jaws moving in waves, devouring anything alive. Even Krylith warriors feared them, the guard growled. "We must secure the hatchlings." The chamber doors slammed shut with heavy locks. Daniel looked around. The hatchlings had sensed the danger too. Their glowing eyes were wide, their bodies tense, claws scraping the sand. They were ready to fight, but they were still young. Too young. The ground vibrated again. Distant screeches echoed through the walls. Daniel's heart raced. The guards prepared their weapons, long blades that burned with plasma light. But even they seemed uneasy. Minutes stretched like hours. Then the first breach came. The wall cracked open with a shriek of tearing metal. From the hole poured the swarm. Hundreds of small, shining bodies, their legs clattering, their jaws snapping. The guards roared, leaping forward to fight. Their blades cut through dozens of parasites, sparks and ichor spraying the sand. But for every one they killed, 10 more appeared. The hatchlings hissed, snapping their teeth, ready to join the battle. But Daniel jumped in front of them. "No, stay back." One hatchling growled at him, confused. Their nature was to fight, to prove strength. But Daniel shook his head, his voice firm. "Not now. You're not ready. You'll get hurt. Stay with me." The swarm pressed closer. The guards fought bravely, but the tide was too great. Already one guard was dragged down, vanishing beneath the wave of parasites. The other shouted in fury, but it was clear he would not hold for long. Daniel's mind raced. He had no weapon. He had no armor. All he had were his wits, his voice, and 6 young predators who looked to him. "Listen to me," he said quickly, crouching to face the hatchlings. His voice shook, but he forced it steady. "We're not going to fight them head on. We're going to be smart. We're going to survive. Together." The hatchlings hissed in confusion, but they listened. They trusted him. Daniel scanned the chamber. He saw the molten river glowing faintly beyond the cracks in the wall. He saw the parasite swarm pouring in like water. And then he saw the pile of toys and ropes he had used for games. "All right," he whispered. "We can do this." He grabbed the ropes and tied them quickly, his hands moving faster than they ever had. He lashed them around stone slabs, making crude traps. He pulled the hatchlings into position. "When they come close, pull together." "Not alone." "Together!" The parasites rushed forward. The hatchlings roared, but instead of charging, they waited for Daniel's signal. At the last second, Daniel shouted, "Now!" 6 small but powerful bodies yanked on the ropes. The stone slab tipped over, crashing down on dozens of parasites. A path opened for a moment. "Move," Daniel cried. He led the hatchlings toward the back of the chamber. Parasites poured after them, snapping and screeching. Daniel grabbed one of the glowing balls from their games and hurled it across the floor. The parasites, drawn by movement, swarmed after it. The hatchlings bolted forward, following Daniel's lead. He didn't stop to think. Every second counted. He remembered every survival story he had ever read, every trick he had ever heard. He used sound, movement, and teamwork to pull the swarm in the wrong direction, but the chamber was collapsing. The walls split wider. More parasites poured in. Daniel's chest burned with fear. "We can't hold forever. We need an escape." And then he saw it. A maintenance tunnel high on the wall, half hidden by stone. Too small for guards, but just big enough for hatchlings. "That's it," Daniel pointed. "Up there." The hatchlings looked uncertain. The wall was steep and parasites swarmed at the base, but Daniel's voice rang firm. "Climb, you can do it. I'll help." He ran first, grabbing rocks, pulling himself up. His hands slipped, but he forced himself higher. The hatchlings followed, claws scraping, tails lashing for balance. Parasites leapt after them, but Daniel kicked them away, his boots smashing their brittle bodies. One hatchling slipped, screeching. Daniel caught it by the tail, his muscles screaming, and pulled it back. "I've got you. Keep climbing." One by one, the hatchlings reached the tunnel. Daniel shoved them inside, pushing them forward. "Go, don't stop!" The last hatchling hesitated, eyes wide with fear. Parasites swarmed closer. Daniel roared louder than he ever had in his life, "And climb." The hatchling obeyed. Daniel scrambled after them, squeezing into the tunnel just as the swarm crashed below. The sound of chittering jaws filled the chamber, but the tunnel was narrow enough to keep them out, at least for now. The hatchlings crowded together, their glowing eyes fixed on him. For the first time, Daniel saw fear in their faces. But he also saw trust. They had followed him, not their instincts. They had chosen his way. Daniel leaned back against the stone, gasping for breath. He was scratched, bruised, and exhausted, but they were alive. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness. No one knew where it led, but it was away from the swarm, and for now that was enough. One hatchling nudged his arm softly. Another rested its head against his knee. They were predators, yes, but in this moment they were also children looking to the one who had saved them. Daniel smiled faintly, though his body ached. "Good job, team. We made it." Far away in the halls of the Galactic Union, reports of the swarm attack began to spread. Most feared the worst. Surely the human would have perished. Surely the hatchlings would be gone. But soon, word arrived that shocked everyone. The human babysitter had not only survived but had led the hatchlings to safety against impossible odds, and the galaxy began to whisper. Perhaps humanity's strength was not in claws, armor, or power. Perhaps it was something far more dangerous, the ability to lead, to adapt, and to inspire even predators to follow. The parasite swarm had been repelled thanks to Daniel's courage and quick thinking. The hatchlings, though exhausted and shaken, had survived. For the first time, the Krylith elders saw their young not only alive but stronger in ways that no predator instinct alone could provide. Daniel leaned against the tunnel wall, his chest heaving, sweat and scratches marking his face and arms. The hatchlings huddled around him, tails curling, eyes glowing softly in the dim light. He looked at them and felt an odd sense of pride. They had listened. They had followed. They had survived, because they had trusted him. "You did well," he whispered, brushing a clawed head gently. "All of you." The hatchlings made soft hissing noises, a sound of quiet contentment. It was far from the wild cries of a week ago. They were beginning to understand something new. The human's way was not weakness but guidance. Soon the Krylith elders arrived, stepping carefully through the damaged chambers. Their glowing eyes scanned the scene. No guards were dead, the hatchlings were safe, and the human, though battered, stood tall. One elder spoke, voice low and resonant. "You have done what no Krylith could. You have guided them through a trial and preserved their lives." Daniel shook his head slightly. "I didn't do it alone. They helped. We worked together." The elder's gaze softened. "Perhaps it is the human way. You teach more than strength. You teach thought, patience, and care. Perhaps that is what the young needed." Daniel thought of the lessons, the games, the stories he had told the hatchlings. He thought of the moments when their instincts screamed to fight, yet they listened and chose differently. He realized then why the Krylith had selected a human. It was not for size, not for strength, not even for courage alone. It was for perspective, for an instinct they themselves lacked, the ability to guide with balance, to nurture strength with wisdom. Word spread quickly across the nursery world. Observers from other species came to see the aftermath. They found the hatchlings calm, playing together and following simple commands. They were stronger than before, sharper, yet disciplined in ways no apex predator had ever been taught. Rumors reached the Galactic Union. A human trained predators? One ambassador asked in disbelief. Impossible. And yet it was true. The story reached every corner of the galaxy. Species that had laughed at humanity's small size and short history now paused to consider their abilities. Humans had survived a test that no other species could have completed. Not with weapons, not with armor, not with claws. They had succeeded through leadership, ingenuity, and the ability to inspire trust. Back in the nursery world, Daniel spent the next weeks reinforcing what he had taught. He introduced new challenges, small but significant, hunting simulations that required teamwork, obstacle courses that demanded cooperation, and puzzles that required thinking rather than fighting. The hatchlings excelled. Their natural strength, combined with the lessons of patience, planning, and teamwork, made them formidable in ways no Krylith alone could have imagined. One afternoon, as Daniel watched them chase each other through the stone corridors, he realized something extraordinary. They were no longer just young predators, they were a new kind of predator. One that could think, plan, and act together without turning every moment into a fight. The Krylith elders returned once more, observing quietly. They said nothing at first, but their expressions told Daniel everything. Respect, awe, and perhaps a hint of fear. The galaxy's apex predators had been humbled. Not by another predator, not by a weapon, but by a human. Humans are remarkable, one elder murmured. Not for strength, but for understanding. Daniel smiled faintly. Thank you, he said. He realized that this simple statement carried more weight than any award, more than any recognition. He had proven that humans could not only survive among the greatest predators of the galaxy, but also guide them toward a better way. News of Daniel's success reached Earth, his home. Humans celebrated quietly, knowing that their species had just earned a unique respect across the stars. No longer were they seen as fragile, unpredictable, or weak. Instead, they were seen as capable, clever, and brave, able to influence even the strongest creatures of the galaxy. The impact spread further. Other alien species requested humans to guide their own young, recognizing that humans had a talent for balance, leadership, and nurturing intelligence in the next generation. Schools of predators, scouts of hunters, even young explorers sought human guidance. The Krylith themselves, once feared and isolated, began to open their culture to humans. Meetings that had once been tense became collaborative. Lessons learned from Daniel's work with the hatchlings influenced training methods, cooperation exercises, and even interspecies alliances. Daniel remained humble. He knew that what he had done was extraordinary not because of his strength, but because of his persistence, patience, and willingness to understand. He had trusted the hatchlings, and in return they had trusted him. That trust had survived challenges that no one else believed possible. One evening, as the twin moons of the nursery world rose in perfect alignment, Daniel sat outside the main chamber, the hatchlings resting around him. The air shimmered with heat and energy, and the distant stars glimmered like scattered gems. He looked at the small predators, their eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. "You're strong," he whispered, "stronger than anyone imagined. But remember, strength is nothing without thought, without care, without unity. You are more than predators, you are the future." The hatchlings hissed softly, curling closer to him. Their trust in him had grown into something deeper. They no longer saw him as fragile. They saw him as a guide, a protector, and a teacher. Daniel realized then that this was more than a lesson for them. It was a lesson for the galaxy, that even the strongest could learn from the smallest. That courage and intelligence were not measured in claws, armor, or power, but in patience, leadership, and the ability to inspire others. From the nursery world to the council halls of the Galactic Union, the galaxy began to shift. Species that had once dismissed humanity now paused to watch. Humans were no longer simply survivors. They were leaders. They were thinkers. They were teachers. And somewhere deep in the galaxy, the apex predators themselves acknowledged it. They had chosen a human as a babysitter, expecting failure or weakness. Instead, they had found wisdom, courage, and balance, the qualities that even they, the mightiest hunters in the galaxy, had never fully mastered. Daniel smiled faintly as he watched the hatchlings sleep, their small bodies curled in the sand. He thought of Earth, of humans' long journey across the stars, and of the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The galaxy had once underestimated humanity. Now it had reason to respect it, and in that quiet, glowing chamber on a distant world, surrounded by creatures of legend, one human had changed the way the stars would look at his kind forever. The galaxy would never forget the day apex predators picked a human babysitter and were utterly, completely and unexpectedly shocked.